Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes.
It felt like just another live TV moment, until one bold question stopped the entire studio cold. What happens when Hollywood's most unshakable star walks onto daytime television expecting light laughter, only to find herself in the center of a quiet storm that no one saw coming? The lights inside the studio of The View glowed warmer than usual that morning. The audience buzzed with anticipation, a low hum of excitement rippling across the seats. Cameras floated smoothly on their tracks. Producers whispered into headsets. It was supposed to be another polished segment, another big-name guest smiling through promotional questions. And then she walked out. Margot Robbie stepped onto the stage with that familiar poise, elegant, composed, luminous under the lights. The applause swelled instantly. She waved softly, the effortless Australian warmth radiating outward. She looked calm, confident, untouchable. Across the table, Joy Behar leaned back slightly in her chair, studying her with a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Whoopi Goldberg greeted her first, warm and steady. "Margot, welcome back." "It's so good to be here," Margot replied, voice light, perfectly measured. Sunny Hostin chimed in with a compliment about her latest film, and the audience cheered again. The energy was buoyant, friendly, safe. For now. Joy adjusted her glasses, glancing down at her notes. "You've built quite the empire, haven't you?" she began, her tone playful but edged. "Acting, producing, box office domination. Some might say you've cracked the code." Margot smiled politely. "I've been very lucky." "Lucky," Joy repeated, tilting her head. "Is that what we're calling it?" A ripple passed through the audience. It was subtle, but noticeable. Margot's smile didn't falter. "Hard work helps too." Joy leaned forward now. "Of course. But there's been chatter about whether Hollywood tends to reward certain images more than others. Blonde, beautiful, marketable. Do you think the industry has been kinder to you?" The room shifted. It was the kind of question that sounds intellectual on the surface, but lands personal. Margot's posture remained perfectly straight. She folded her hands gently on the table. "I think the industry is complicated," she said carefully. "There's privilege in many forms. I won't deny that." Joy raised an eyebrow. "So you admit it?" Whoopi jumped in lightly, sensing the edge. "Joy, I think what she's saying is—" "No, I'm curious," Joy pressed, eyes locked on Margot. "Because there are actresses who fight for decades for the opportunities you seem to get overnight." The audience grew quiet. Margot inhaled slowly. Inside, something flickered, but on the surface, she remained composed. "It wasn't overnight," she replied gently. "I auditioned for years. I moved across the world with no guarantees. I worked small roles. I failed. A lot." Joy gave a short laugh. "But you didn't exactly struggle." There it was. Not loud. Not explosive. But sharp. A few audience members shifted in their seats. Sunny's expression tightened. Alyssa Farah Griffin glanced toward Whoopi, sensing the temperature rising. Margot's eyes softened, but her voice gained weight. "Struggle looks different for everyone. I don't compare mine to someone else's. But I know what I sacrificed." Joy folded her arms. "Sacrificed what?" The question lingered in the air like smoke. Margot paused. For the first time, the smile faded just slightly. "Privacy," she said quietly. "Normalcy. The ability to fail without headlines. The pressure to be perfect all the time. To be grateful even when you're exhausted." The studio was silent now. Joy leaned back again. "That's fame. That's not oppression." A small gasp came from somewhere in the audience. Whoopi cleared her throat. "Joy." "No, let's talk about it," Joy continued. "Because sometimes when celebrities talk about their hardships, it sounds disconnected from reality." Margot didn't blink. This wasn't anger in her eyes. It was something steadier. "You're right," she said calmly. "It can sound disconnected. That's why I try to be careful about how I speak. But that doesn't mean it isn't real." Joy tilted her head again. "Real compared to what?" The tension was no longer subtle. It was visible, like a wire stretched too tight between them. Margot leaned forward slightly now, mirroring Joy's posture, but without aggression. "Real compared to my own experience," she answered. "I don't measure my pain against someone else's to validate it. I just acknowledge it." Sunny stepped in gently. "I think what Margot is saying is that multiple truths can exist at once." Joy exhaled through her nose, tapping her pen against the table. "Sure. But let's not pretend Hollywood hasn't handed you a golden ticket." There it was again, The implication. Margot's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I've worked very hard for every role I've earned, she said, still calm. And I've also benefited from timing, connections, and being in the right place. Both things can be true. The audience began to murmur softly, some nodding, some whispering. Joy wasn't finished. So if a young actress watching this feels like the system isn't built for her, what do you say? Just work harder. Margot's eyes flickered, just for a second. Then she answered. I say it's not fair. And it's okay to admit that. But I also say your voice matters. Your work matters. And sometimes the system changes because people push it to. Joy studied her closely now, as if searching for cracks. But there were none. Only composure. Whoopi smiled slightly, sensing the shift. That's a fair answer. But Joy gave one last push. Do you ever worry that calm responses like that are just good PR? The question landed heavier than the others. The audience froze again. Margot didn't look offended. She looked resolute. I worry more about not being honest, she said quietly. Calm doesn't mean calculated. Sometimes it just means I've learned not to let other people define my story. A beat of silence. Then, unexpectedly, applause. It started small. One corner of the studio. Then another. Until the entire audience was clapping. Not wildly. Not explosively. But firmly. Joy's lips pressed into a thin line. Whoopi nodded slowly. Sunny smiled openly now. And Margot Robbie sat there, still composed, still graceful, but no longer simply the glowing movie star promoting a film. She was holding her ground. And the calm in her voice? It wasn't weakness. It was control. But the segment wasn't over. And Joy Behar wasn't done yet. The storm hadn't exploded. It was only beginning to gather. The applause faded, but the energy didn't. It lingered, thick, electric, humming beneath the studio lights like a live wire no one could see but everyone could feel. Margot Robbie sat poised, hands resting lightly on the table, her expression serene. But her eyes were sharper now. More aware. Across from her, Joy Behar adjusted in her seat, lips pursed as if she were deciding whether to pivot or press harder. Whoopi sensed it. Let's talk about the film, she said smoothly, attempting to steer the ship back to safer waters. You not only starred in this one, you produced it. Margot nodded. Yes. It was important to me to tell stories from perspectives we don't always see. Such as? Joy interjected quickly. Margot didn't hesitate. Women who are complicated. Not just likable. Not just decorative. Women who get to be messy and ambitious and flawed. A few audience members clapped softly. Joy arched an eyebrow. And you think Hollywood hasn't already been giving you that? The question sounded casual. It wasn't. Margot's gaze didn't waver. I think it's evolving. Slowly. Joy leaned in again. But you're one of the faces of that evolution. So when you talk about the industry needing change, some people roll their eyes. Sunny shifted slightly. Joy. No, I'm serious, Joy continued. You're producing major blockbusters. You're powerful now. Isn't it easier to critique the system once you're on top of it? There it was again, that subtle framing. As if success cancelled struggle. As if influence erased vulnerability. Margot inhaled slowly. You're right, she said. It is easier to speak once you have leverage. That's exactly why I feel responsible to use it. The audience reacted with a low murmur of approval. Joy tilted her head. Responsible how? By opening doors, Margot replied. By hiring differently. By funding stories that wouldn't normally get financed. Joy gave a small shrug. And do you think that balances the scales? Margot paused. No, she said honestly. But it's a start. The honesty landed heavier than any polished answer could have. Alyssa leaned forward. I actually think that's powerful. Recognizing you can't fix everything but still choosing to try. Joy gave her a sideways glance but didn't respond. Her focus was still locked on Margot. Let me ask you something more personal, Joy said, voice softening, but only slightly. When critics say your image has been carefully crafted, feminist but glamorous, outspoken but never controversial, does that frustrate you? The audience collectively leaned in. Margot's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not defensive. Not rattled. Thoughtful. I can't control every narrative, she said carefully. And I don't want to. Joy pounced gently. So you're okay being packaged? Margot gave the faintest smile. I'm okay knowing who I am outside of the package. A small wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. Joy didn't laugh. But doesn't that packaging protect you? She pressed. Other actresses speak out and get labeled difficult. Angry. Unstable. You stay calm, and you're praised. There it was. Not just a question. An accusation. The air tightened again. Margot's fingers interlocked, resting calmly in front of her. But her voice, when she spoke, carried more weight now. Calm isn't a strategy, she said quietly. It's a choice. Joy crossed her arms. A safe choice. Margot shook her head slightly. A deliberate one. The room stilled. Because I've seen what happens when women are emotional in public, she continued. They get dismissed. So I learned to speak in a way that keeps the focus on the message, not the reaction. The audience clapped again, louder this time. Joy exhaled sharply through her nose. So you're saying the system punishes emotion? I'm saying, Margot replied, still measured, that women are often judged more for how they say something than what they are saying. Sunny nodded firmly. That's true. Whoopi leaned back, watching the exchange with a careful expression. Joy wasn't smiling anymore. And yet, Joy said slowly, some might argue that by staying composed, you're playing into the very system you claim needs change. A murmur swept through the audience. Margot's eyes flickered, not with irritation, but with something steadier. Resolve. I don't think strength has to be loud, she said. And I don't think anger is the only valid form of resistance. The words hung in the air. Joy studied her, perhaps expecting a crack. A slip. A flash of temper. It didn't come. Instead, Margot leaned forward slightly, just enough to signal engagement, not confrontation. You've been in this industry a long time, she added gently. You know it rewards spectacle. I'm not interested in spectacle. Joy's lips tightened. So this is spectacle. Margot held her gaze. No, she said calmly. This is conversation. The audience erupted, not in chaos, but in firm, undeniable applause. Whoopi smiled openly now. Okay, she said lightly. I think that's fair. But Joy wasn't done, not quite. You don't seem rattled, she observed. Most guests would be by now. Margot's answer came instantly. Why would I be? A flicker crossed Joy's face. Well, she said, almost teasing, you're being challenged. Margot nodded. And I'm answering. The simplicity of it disarmed the room. For a brief moment, the tension shifted, from adversarial to almost philosophical. Joy leaned back again, folding her hands. So you don't mind being questioned? I welcome it, Margot replied. As long as it's fair. A subtle emphasis on the last word. The audience caught it. Joy caught it too. And you think I've been unfair? Joy asked quietly. The room froze. Margot didn't rush. I think you've been direct, she said carefully. And I respect that. But I also think sometimes assumptions sneak into questions. Joy's eyes narrowed slightly. Such as, that success equals ease, Margot answered. Or that calm equals calculation. Silence. Joy didn't interrupt this time. Margot continued, voice steady but warmer now. I don't resent the questions. I just hope we're asking them of everyone equally. That line landed like a stone in still water. Ripples everywhere. Sunny nodded emphatically. Alyssa murmured, that's important. Whoopi glanced at Joy, then back at Margot. For the first time since the segment began, Joy didn't immediately respond. The audience began to clap again, slower, more thoughtful. Margot sat back slightly, her posture still elegant, her expression serene, but something had shifted. This wasn't just a press tour stop anymore. It had become a quiet debate about power, perception, gender, image, and the calmest person at the table was also the one refusing to yield. But the producers were signaling. Time was running, and Joy Behar had one final card left to play. A question she had been holding back. A question that would test whether Margot's composure was truly unbreakable, or if even the calmest surface could crack under the right pressure. The red tally light on the center camera blinked softly. 30 seconds to commercial. Producers along the edge of the stage shifted in their headsets, sensing the segment had taken on a life of its own. The polite promotional tone from earlier was gone. In its place was something sharper. Realer. Joy Behar glanced down at her notes one last time. Then she looked up. You know, she began, her voice quieter now, almost conversational. There's something I've always wondered about you. The audience leaned in again. Margot Robbie didn't move. Okay. Joy folded her hands together on the table. When you first broke out, when the world suddenly decided you were the next big thing, Did you ever question whether they were seeing you, or just what they wanted you to be? The question was softer than the others, but it cut deeper. A hush fell across the studio. Margot blinked once. Inside, something shifted. Not panic. Not anger. Memory. She saw flashes, audition rooms, casting directors whispering after she left, headlines dissecting her appearance, roles described with words like bombshell before actor. Her smile faded completely now, not dramatically, just honestly. Yes, she said. The honesty surprised the room. Joy's eyes flickered. You did? Yes. Margot's voice was still calm, but heavier. There were moments early on when I wondered if I'd ever get to outgrow the image people attached to me. Sunny nodded gently. That's real. Joy tilted her head. But you benefited from that image. There it was again. The undercurrent. Margot didn't flinch this time. I did, she acknowledged. And I also felt trapped by it. The audience murmured softly. Joy leaned forward. Trapped how? Margot's gaze stayed steady, but her voice softened. When people decide who you are before you've had the chance to show them, it becomes harder to expand beyond that. Every role becomes proof of something. Every interview becomes a test. Joy's tone sharpened slightly. A test you've passed very well. A few uneasy chuckles echoed from the crowd. Margot exhaled gently. Or a test I've learned how to navigate. That line hung there. Navigate. As if fame were less a throne and more a maze. Joy tapped her pen against the table again. But isn't that part of being in the public eye? Reinvention, strategy, brand control. Margot's eyes flickered, not with irritation, but clarity. There's a difference between growth and performance, she said quietly. Whoopi shifted slightly, watching closely now. Joy didn't blink. And which one have you been doing? The tension tightened like a pulled string. Margot held her gaze. Both, she answered. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Joy seemed momentarily caught off guard. I've performed when I needed to, Margot continued. I've played the game when it made sense. But I've also fought for roles that scared me. Produced stories people told me wouldn't sell. That wasn't performance. That was risk. The word risk lingered. Joy folded her arms again. Risk for you is still safer than risk for someone without your platform. Sunny inhaled sharply. Joy. No, let's be honest, Joy pressed. You have a safety net. Power protects you. Margot didn't immediately respond. The room waited. And for the first time, there was the faintest flicker of steel in her voice. Power doesn't erase pressure, she said. It magnifies it. The audience fell completely silent. When you're visible, she continued, every mistake becomes global. Every misstep is permanent. The higher you climb, the harder you're watched. Joy's expression shifted slightly, less combative, more curious. So what scares you? She asked. It wasn't sarcastic. It was direct. Margot paused. For a moment, she looked almost vulnerable, not because she was rattled, but because she was choosing honesty again. What scares me, she said slowly, is becoming smaller to make other people comfortable. The audience exhaled collectively. Joy's eyebrows lifted just a fraction. Smaller, she echoed. Yes, Margot replied. Smaller in ambition. Smaller in voice. Smaller in truth. It's easy to shrink when you're constantly told you already have too much. The words were gentle, but they landed like thunder. Joy's lips parted slightly, as if she were about to respond, but nothing came out immediately. Whoopi broke the silence softly. That's a powerful thing to admit. Joy recovered quickly. So you think people want you smaller? Margot met her gaze without hesitation. I think sometimes strong women are easier to accept when they are agreeable. A quiet gasp came from somewhere near the front row. Sunny nodded slowly. Alyssa murmured, that's true. Joy leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. And you don't see yourself as agreeable. Margot allowed the faintest smile. I see myself as kind, she said. But kindness doesn't mean compliance. The audience clapped, this time louder, more unified. Joy watched the reaction carefully. You're very good at this, she said. At first glance, it sounded like praise. But there was something layered beneath it. Margot tilted her head slightly. At conversation. At staying composed, Joy clarified. Margot held her gaze. I don't think composure is something to apologize for. Joy's lips pressed thin. I'm not asking you to apologize, she replied. I'm asking if you ever feel angry. The question sliced through the air. It wasn't about Hollywood anymore. It was personal. Margot didn't rush her answer. Yes, she said finally. The room stilled. But I've learned, she continued, that anger is most powerful when it's focused. Joy leaned in slightly. So this doesn't make you angry? Margot looked around the table, at Whoopi, at Sunny, at Alyssa, then back at Joy. No, she said calmly. It makes me aware. The precision of the word shifted something. Aware. Not wounded. Not defensive. Aware. Joy's shoulders relaxed just a fraction. And what are you aware of right now? She asked. Margot's response came like a quiet bell. That sometimes when women succeed, the first instinct isn't to celebrate them. It's to interrogate how they got there. The audience erupted. Not chaos, conviction. Applause filled the studio, echoing against the walls. Joy didn't clap. But she didn't interrupt either. For the first time since the segment began, she looked reflective. The red light above the camera blinked again. 10 seconds to commercial. Whoopi leaned forward with a small smile. Well, she said, voice warm but firm, this has certainly been a conversation. Margot allowed herself a small exhale. But as the applause continued and the cameras prepared to cut, Joy turned to her one last time. And when we come back, she said quietly, just loud enough for the microphones to catch, I want to ask you about something specific. About a comment you made last year that some people felt was out of touch. The audience reacted instantly. Gasps. Whispers. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere off camera. Margot didn't blink. She simply nodded once. I'm happy to talk about it. The screen faded to commercial. But in the studio, the calm before had transformed into something else entirely. Not a storm. A reckoning. And when they came back live, it wouldn't just be about image anymore. It would be about accountability. And whether Margot Robbie's calm could withstand the weight of a direct accusation on live television. The commercial break felt shorter than it was. Makeup artists hovered briefly. Producers whispered urgent reminders. The audience buzzed in low, nervous tones, replaying the last exchange in hushed speculation. Margot Robbie sat still in her chair, hands folded loosely in her lap now instead of on the table. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were focused, clear, steady, alert. Across from her, Joy Behar shuffled her cards into a neat stack. The floor manager counted down with silent fingers. 5, 4, 3, 2. The red light blinked back on. And we're back, Whoopi Goldberg said smoothly, her voice carrying that practiced steadiness that only decades of live television can produce. Before the break, Joy said she wanted to ask Margot about something specific. The air tightened instantly. Joy turned slightly in her seat, facing Margot more directly now. Last year, Joy began, her tone measured but unmistakably pointed. You made a comment during an interview about feeling grateful, that your path in Hollywood wasn't as difficult as it could have been. Some critics felt that came off as dismissive, especially toward women who faced systemic barriers you may not have. Do you understand why that upset people? There it was. Not abstract. Not philosophical. Specific. The audience went silent. Margot nodded slowly. Yes, she said. Joy's eyebrows lifted just a touch. You do? Yes. No defensiveness. No hesitation. I understand how it could have sounded, Margot continued. And I also understand why context matters. Joy leaned in. So give us the context. Margot's voice stayed even. In that interview, I was acknowledging that I entered the industry at a time when conversations about women in film were already shifting. I wasn't saying I had no obstacles. I was saying others paved the way before me. Sunny nodded gently. That's important. But Joy didn't let it soften. Yet some felt you were minimizing ongoing inequality, she pressed, almost suggesting the fight was over. Margot shook her head slightly. The fight isn't over. Her tone carried more firmness now. I would never claim that. Joy tilted her head. Then why do you think so many people reacted negatively? Margot paused, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was choosing it carefully. Because, she said slowly, gratitude can sometimes sound like complacency. The audience murmured in agreement. Joy studied her closely. And were you complacent? The word hung heavy. Margot's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. No, she said. But I could have been clearer. There was a ripple of surprise at that. An admission. Not dramatic. But deliberate. Joy blinked. So you're saying you misspoke? I'm saying, Margot replied calmly, that when you're in a position of visibility, precision matters. And if my words made anyone feel unseen, That wasn't my intention. Sunny gave a small, approving nod. But Joy's voice sharpened again. Intent doesn't erase impact. The phrase cut cleanly. Margot didn't recoil. You're right, she said. The audience froze. No argument. No pivot. Just acknowledgement. Joy seemed momentarily thrown off by the lack of resistance. So what would you say now? She asked. Margot inhaled slowly, then looked directly into the camera for the first time since returning from break. I would say this industry still has barriers. For women of color. For women over 40. For women who don't fit a narrow mold. My experience doesn't cancel that reality. The audience applauded, stronger this time. Joy watched her carefully. But, Joy added, your experience is still easier than most. Margot turned back toward her. In some ways, she agreed. And harder in others. Joy's eyes narrowed slightly. Harder how? Margot didn't hesitate. When you're labeled as the lucky one, she said quietly, your work is often scrutinized more harshly. Success gets attributed to appearance instead of effort. Every achievement comes with an asterisk. The room stilled again. Joy crossed her arms. Do you think that's unique to you? No, Margot replied immediately. I think it happens to a lot of women. There was no ego in her answer. No centering. Just inclusion. Joy tapped her pen against the table once more. You're very careful, she observed. Margot smiled faintly. I try to be thoughtful. Joy leaned forward again, her voice lowering. Or strategic. The tension flickered back to life. Margot's eyes held steady. If being thoughtful reads as strategic, she said softly, maybe that says something about how we expect women to speak. A collective ooh rippled through the audience. Joy inhaled sharply. Are you implying I'm holding you to a different standard? She asked. Margot didn't rush. I'm implying, she said carefully, that women are often asked to prove their sincerity in ways men aren't. The studio erupted in applause again, louder than before. Whoopi raised a hand slightly, half smiling as if to calm the wave. Joy remained still. For a long second, neither woman spoke. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't explosive. It was something far more intense. Measured. Joy finally exhaled. You think I'm being unfair? Margot shook her head gently. I think you're being thorough, she said. And I respect that. But I also think sometimes the assumption is that if a woman is composed, she must be calculating. Joy's gaze softened, just slightly. And you're not. Margot's voice dropped lower, steadier. I'm human. The simplicity of it silenced the room. No grand speech. No dramatic flourish. Just truth. Joy leaned back slowly. The edge in her posture eased. You know, she said after a beat, I push because I've seen a lot of polished answers over the years. Margot nodded. I understand. And sometimes, Joy continued, it's hard to tell what's real. Margot's eyes didn't waver. This is real, she said. No tremor. No defensiveness. Just certainty. The audience clapped again, this time not out of excitement, but recognition. Whoopi glanced between them, sensing the shift. I think, she said warmly, what we're seeing here is two women who care about how this industry treats people. And sometimes caring looks like challenging. Joy gave a small, reluctant smile. Margot returned it. But the atmosphere had changed. What began as subtle skepticism had evolved into something deeper, a conversation about perception, power, responsibility. And through it all, Margot hadn't raised her voice. Hadn't snapped. Hadn't retreated. She'd stood her ground with stillness. The segment clock ticked down again. 2 minutes left. Joy glanced at her notes, then back at Margot. One last question, she said. The audience braced. Joy's voice was quieter now. Do you ever get tired of being the calm one? The question wasn't sharp. It was almost empathetic. Margot blinked, surprised. Yes, she admitted softly. A faint murmur swept through the crowd. Yes, she repeated. Because calm takes effort. It's not the absence of feeling. It's choosing which feelings to show. Joy studied her face, searching. And what are you not showing right now? Joy asked gently. The room held its breath. Margot's lips curved into the smallest, most knowing smile. Everything, she said. The audience burst into laughter, relieved, appreciative, stunned. Joy laughed too. Not forced. Not sharp. Genuine. And in that moment, the tension that had defined the entire segment cracked, not with anger, but with understanding. But outside the studio, clips were already being cut. Headlines were already being drafted, and what felt like a resolved conversation inside these walls was about to explode far beyond them. The applause lingered long after the cameras cut. For a moment, it felt like the tension had dissolved into something almost respectful. Two strong women circling each other, challenging and responding, without ever losing control. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the crew reset for the next segment, but no one in the audience was checking their phones. They were replaying it in their heads. Margot Robbie rose from her chair with the same quiet grace she'd entered with. She leaned toward Joy Behar first. "Thank you," she said softly, extending her hand. Joy looked at it for a fraction of a second, then took it. "Don't take it personally," Joy replied, her tone lower now, less performative. "It's my job." Margot gave a small nod. "I know." But as she turned to hug Whoopi Goldberg, something shifted beyond the stage. Because while the studio conversation had ended, the internet conversation had just begun. Backstage, a publicist hurried toward Margot with a tight expression. "It's already trending," she whispered, holding up her phone. Clips were spreading at lightning speed. Margot Robbie stays calm under pressure. Joy Behar grills Margot and gets shut down. Composed or calculated. Hashtags multiplied by the second. On one side, fans praised Margot's restraint, calling her unbreakable, classy, the definition of controlled strength. On the other, critics dissected every pause, every word choice, accusing her of being too polished, too media-trained, too safe. The very debate Joy had raised live on air was now unfolding across millions of screens. Inside the dressing room, Margot finally exhaled fully. Her shoulders dropped, not dramatically, but enough. Her team buzzed around her. "You handled that perfectly. You didn't give them anything to twist. You were incredible." She listened, but her gaze was distant. Calm takes effort. Her own words echoed back at her. Back on set, Joy adjusted her earpiece for the next segment. Sunny leaned toward her during the transition. "You pushed hard," Sunny said quietly. Joy gave a half smile. She pushed back. Sunny nodded. "And she did it well." Joy didn't argue. Later that afternoon, media outlets framed it as a clash. Some called it heated. Others labeled it a masterclass in composure. The clips with the highest views weren't the sharpest questions. They were Margot's pauses, her measured breaths, her steady gaze when Joy asked, "Are you strategic?" The moment she said, "Kindness doesn't mean compliance." The line, "The first instinct isn't to celebrate them. It's to interrogate how they got there." That one exploded. Comment sections filled with personal stories from women in every industry, law, medicine, tech, media, who said they'd felt that interrogation in their own lives. But there were dissenting voices too. "She's privileged. She's playing the victim." It's easy to sound wise when you're already on top. The conversation wasn't clean. It wasn't unanimous. It was messy. And that, perhaps, was the most honest outcome of all. That evening, Joy addressed it briefly during a follow-up discussion. "People are calling it a feud," she said on air, shaking her head lightly. "It wasn't a feud. It was a conversation." Whoopi added, "Sometimes when women challenge each other publicly, people expect fireworks. What they saw instead was control." Control. The word resurfaced again. Meanwhile, Margot stepped onto a different red carpet that night. Flashbulbs exploded in front of her face. Reporters shouted questions over one another. "Do you regret anything you said this morning? Was Joy out of line? Were you holding back?" Margot smiled gently. "I think it's healthy to have hard conversations," she replied. "And I think we both did that. No bitterness. No shade. Just clarity." But when she finally sat alone in the back of her car, city lights streaking past the window, her reflection looked different than it had that morning. Not shaken. Not defeated. Just thoughtful. She replayed Joy's final question. "Do you ever get tired of being the calm one?" "Yes. Because calm is a discipline. Calm is swallowing the impulse to react. Calm is choosing impact over volume." The next morning, the headlines had matured. Margot Robbie redefines strength on live TV. Joy Behar sparks necessary debate. Composure versus confrontation. Who won? But the truth? There was no winner. Only perspective. Inside the View studio, producers privately admitted it had been one of their most engaging segments of the year. Ratings spiked. Clips dominated social feeds. Think pieces dissected the exchange as a cultural moment, less about two individuals and more about how society measures female power. Was calm strength? or performance? Was directness honesty? Or aggression? Margot had walked in expecting to promote a film. She walked out having unintentionally sparked a larger conversation. And maybe that was the point. Because the clash was never explosive. There were no raised voices. No insults. No walk-offs. It was sharper than that. It was about tone. Expectation. Perception. And in a world that often rewards spectacle, the most shocking thing that happened on that stage was restraint. Joy had pressed. Margot had answered. And neither woman had shrunk. That was the real moment. Not the viral clips. Not the headlines. But the image of two women holding eye contact across a table, refusing to caricature each other. Days later, the noise began to settle. But one comment remained pinned beneath the most viewed clip. Why do we demand that successful women explain themselves more than anyone else? It had hundreds of thousands of likes. Maybe that was the aftermath. Not outrage. Reflection. And now, we want to hear from you. Was Margot Robbie truly calm, or carefully strategic? Was Joy Behar unfair, or simply doing her job? Did this moment reveal strength, or expose the pressure placed on women in power? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more inside the storm moments like this, where celebrity interviews turn into cultural flashpoints,